Hello and welcome everyone to another Inkarnate live stream. My name is Mati and today we're going to be tackling the blend modes. So welcome everybody, glad that people are here. Let's go ahead and do two real quick announcements before we dive into the blend modes. Okay, in this stream we are going to be covering blend modes, how they operate and how to apply them to your maps. Okay, all right, so first let's just jump right in with the announcements real quick. The first announcement, if you go ahead and just move your mouse up to the top of the screen, top right, you're going to see a center icon that says see what's new. That's going to be your notifications. If you click that, you're going to notice that there's some new notifications. Guess what? We are going to Gen Con, everybody. Yes, to Gen Con. That's going to be in Indianapolis, Indiana, August 4th to August 7th at the Convention Center. We are going to be in booth 1459 in the exhibit hall. So go check us out. Super exciting, and I am ready for that. I will be there, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all there as well. So super excited about that. Now this is a bit of an older announcement, about a week old now, but don't forget we had just included some new features. That includes Shadows 2.0, fill options, shortcuts bar, and more. Just scroll down that announcement to check out all the different features that we've included. So hey, a little bit of quality of life is always nice. Okay, so hey, you're on time, Diana Dubell. So glad that you are here. Let's go into blend modes. Okay, now that I've done my announcements, I'm just gonna go ahead and open up this map right here at 2K. We'll open it up, let it load. Let's first define our terms. What is a blend mode? A blend mode is basically a mode that's going to allow two or more layers to blend with each other. Now, at first, that may be confusing. What do you mean by layers? So let's go ahead and define our terms by layers. I'm going to let the map load, and I'll go ahead and explain how that works. Okay. Now, in Inkarnate, there are, well, let's go over the blend modes here real quick. Sorry, there are two layers, okay? Now the two layers that are gonna interact with each other is gonna be a base layer and there's gonna be a blend layer. Now in Inkarnate, the base layer, permanent base layer, is the paintable FG and BG layers that are made with the add and subtract mode of the mask tool. So if you don't have any stamps or any kind of object on the map, your base layer will always be the paintable FG and BG layers, okay? So that's always gonna be your base layer, all right? So now a base layer can also be a stamp, a path, or whatever. So if this is gonna be the base layer, then I wanna put another stamp on top of it to be the blend layer. So your base layer is basically the layer beneath the blend layer. That's it. It's as simple as it is, right? Now, when it comes to your blend layer is very specifically going to be a couple things. One, your blend layer is going to be a stamp because it possesses the ability to use blend modes. Your text is going to work as a blend layer because it also has the ability to use blend modes. Your paths also have the ability to use blend modes. And of course, filters also possess that ability. More specifically, your texture filters possesses the ability to use blend modes. So your blend layer is going to be among those 5 or 4 tools right there, okay? All right, so that's pretty simple. Now let's go ahead and break down a little bit about what you see in front of you. All right, you're noticing that there is a grayscale gradient going from black to white. Now, why do I have this? Now, we need to understand a little bit about light. Because computer screens, monitors, use light to project the images, we have to understand a little bit about light and how it operates, okay? So with black, in light, black is the absence of all color, and therefore it is zero. Nothingness, right? It has no color. It's devoid of any hue. Now, when I say hue is the same thing as color. That's it. So if you hear me say hue and you're like, well, what's hue? It's the same thing as color, okay? Now, white is 100% color, okay? So all the hues are bound up into white. That's why when you put a prism up against a light, against the sun, you'll notice that it breaks down all the colors and shows a spectrum of colors. So 0 is black, 0 light, 100 is 100% hue or color, all the colors, all right? Now, everything in between black and white in this instance is going to be midtones. Now, the reason why I mention this is because some blend modes are going to interact with 0 or black and 100 white differently, while other blend modes will only work with the gray scales or the midtones, okay? It's really as simple as that. So let me go ahead. So just remember, black 0, white 100, okay? Let's go ahead and jump into blend modes real quick. Now you're going to notice that there are several groups of blend modes. That first blend mode is normal. So if I put a stamp down and I look at the blend mode, it's set to normal, which means that it is not interacting with the background or the base layer in any way at all, okay? So it's just normal. The way the stamp was rendered, imported into the tool, and used, it has no blending whatsoever, okay? Now, so that one's not complex. Now, the next blend mode group is going to be the Darken group, okay? All the Darken group really does is just darken. That's it. So it's useful for darkening things, basically. Now, the first one in the Darken group, well, who would have guessed? It's Darken. Now, this blend mode does not necessarily blend pixels. What the Darken blend mode does is it compares the base layer and the blend layer, and it keeps the darkest of the two. That's it. Let's just do a real quick demo, real quick. I'm going to take just this flat red stamp that I picked right here, put it up at 100% opacity. So this is just a flat color. We will be showing, because you're not going to be using flat colors a lot, but just to give you an idea of how it operates. So its blend mode is set to normal, right? It does not interact with the gray colors or the black and the white beneath, right? But if I set the blend mode to darken, see what happens here, right? So with black, because black is 0, because black has no information, no color, therefore that red color is not going to read on that first panel. But you go all the way to the bottom panel here and you notice this one right here, this panel right here, it retains 100% of that red stamp. So when I click that stamp and I turn it back to normal, notice there's no change whatsoever with white, okay? None whatsoever. So all that it's doing is just being a picky snob and picking the darker colors over the light. That's as simple as it is. Now, for most people, you're probably not going to use a flat color, right? Instead, you're probably going to end up using a little bit more information, something busier. Let's put down a map that I made and imported as a custom stamp. I'm going to put it down. So again, the blend mode is set to normal, right? So nothing is going on. It's not interacting. But if I go to darken, you see what happens? What it's doing is it's picking the gray values from the bottom layer, the base layer, and showing it through the blend layer. So again, with black, 0, no information, and it just picks the black, okay? And if you go down to the bottom right panel, of course, you notice 100% of the map shows. So if I take it back to the normal blend mode, you notice that there's no change, okay? So again, what the Darken blend mode does is just darken. It's not complex, right? Let's maybe apply a stamp to it just to see what that feels like, okay? So I have this nice brain coral right here set to normal. If I change that blend mode to darken, it completely hides the stamp. Why? Because the black overrides any of the color or brightness levels from that stamp. But if I move it further in, you notice that, hey, there it goes, right? So now it keeps the gray, which is much darker than the stamp, and it shows through onto the stamp, right? Now, the further I go into lighter tones, you notice that more of the light from that stamp pops out. And of course, if I go into that last bottom right panel, it's at 100% color, right? What that stamp is, right? So it's really just as simple as that, not complex, right? I'm going to go ahead and move the stamp back, and we can go into the next blend mode. The next blend mode is the multiply blend mode. The multiply blend mode is just basically a darker version of the darken blend mode. Not complex, right? So let's go and put that tetra map down. And I'll put it back up and you can kind of see the difference. Let's go to darken, right? And if I switch to multiply, all it really does is just multiplies, right? It's more dark than the previous one. So it's just a darker version of darken. That's it, not complex, all right? Super easy to understand. Let me go back to that tetra map and I'll bring the opacity back down to 0. So it's not complex. Multiply is just a darker version. That's it. All right, let's move to the next blend mode. The next blend mode is going to be color burn. Color burn is a bit different than the darken and multiply. The color burn, basically this blend mode darkens the top layer, that's the blend layer, and increasing the contrast to reflect the color of the bottom layer. So the darker the bottom layer, that's the base layer is, the more its color is used. So highlights will basically be reduced. Okay, so if I take this stamp and I put it in here and I switch the blend mode over to color burn, again, because this black panel is darker than the stamp itself, 0 information from the stamp is going to show. So in other words, black and white are not the colors that you want to use when working with the darken blend mode. Now if I switch over, you notice that it's pure, pretty much black. Just remember, color burn. What does burning do? It creates ash, right? It's black, okay? So color burn, it's burning the colors, and it's highly reducing the highlights. So the closer I get to the lighter colors of the base layer, the more the highlights are going to pop out. But pure white is going to completely negate. So black and white with color burn are completely negated. And so, of course, when you're using the color burn blend mode with paths, textures, or not textures, sorry, stamps and stuff like that, you're not going to want to use black and white. You're going to want to use some kind of hue, some kind of gray or other hue when you're trying to apply this blend mode, okay? Let's go ahead and put this back to normal and let's talk about use cases. What exactly is the darken blend mode used for? This blend mode is most commonly used for adding shadows to areas with a path or a stamp. So let's go over to our tetra map, put it at 100%. We'll put it back to the normal blend mode. Now I'm going to go ahead and take a path. Now what's very common on a lot of maps is that people are looking for a way to make their certain buildings pop out more, right? So if we zoom into the tetra map here, and you kind of notice there's this Temple of the Seven Dunes. Well, it's hard to portray depth. Like technically this building is huge and it would cast a rather large shadow, right? So using the path tool, I'm going to go ahead and put the path down first, okay? So this way I can see how it interacts with the base layer. That's this tetra map. Now, of course, what I said was do not use black, okay? Because black isn't going to work. It's not going to darken. And you don't want to switch it to white either, okay? So see what happens when I switch the blend mode to darken. You see how white completely negates? Just like we showed that bottom right panel, white has 0 effect. So if you're going to use the darken blend modes, don't use white. Okay, now if I switch the blend mode to black, of course, the blend mode darken doesn't even show the information underneath it because the path is black. So if you're going to do shading with these blend modes, you probably want to add a hue to it. So you could use gray, for instance, if you wanted to, or you can use a color like maybe a dark brown or a red, okay? Now, overall, when I'm doing shadowing, and the thing you need to know is that the overall color. So if we look at the overall color of this base map or this base layer, I see a lot of oranges and yellows. So for me, shadows are probably going to be within that range, browns, darker browns, oranges, or red, right? So because black is not usable, okay? So let me real quick put down this real quick. So look carefully with this right here. I'm going to go and increase the size, and I'm going to go ahead and change the color a little bit. Okay, so now if I go to the normal blend mode, you'll notice that it has that brown and there's no interaction beneath it, right? But if I switch to darken, you'll notice that there's some information underneath. You see? So darken is with a hue, that means anywhere between the midtones, not black and white, okay? If I go to multiply, you see it makes it darker, doesn't it? Even darker, right? If I go to the color burn, what is it doing? It's burning the highlights and leaving the darks. So I'm burning those highlights. Look at the highlights. See how they pop out and they look a little burned? That's what color burn does. Now, I don't use color burn when I'm doing my shadowing. I like to use either darken or multiply. And the reason why that is because with darken, now for some of you who do some shading with the path tool, you're going to notice something. If I go with this darken blend mode here like this, and let me just switch it to, let's say, multiply, okay? And I put down another path, it's multiplying. See, I can see the other path going through that other path, right? But if I take the two paths, select the darken blend mode, oh, now look at that. It does not overlap. It's not multiplying. So the darken blend mode works good for painting in shadows without seeing any overlap of the two, okay? So if I go to blur, and I'm going to use this darken blend mode, and I want to go in and create maybe just a hard shadow right here. Okay, let's go ahead and just put that in right there. Got this nice hard shadow. Let's put another one in right here like this. Let's overlap because it's going to be going overlapping. Let's take a step back. Okay, now if I take a step back, you'll notice right away that there's this nice dark shadowy color here, right? So this is a way to show depth. If you're not comfortable with the red, of course, you can always change it to a different color. You want it to be a gray, you want it to be maybe an orange, more of a dark orangish color, you absolutely can. What you don't want to do is use black or white, okay? Because they have no blending effect whatsoever. So make sure you put a little bit of hue or use a midtone when you're doing your shadowing with the path tool, okay? That's really what I like to use these blend modes for, because when you're using the path tool, you kind of want to not lose the information underneath. So black and white are not what you want to use. You're going to want to use some kind of hue in your path when you're doing your shadow work, okay? Let's go move to the next blend mode, okay? Let me go ahead and put this tetramat back to 0, okay? Let's go to that next blend mode group. The next blend mode group is called Lighten, okay? And it basically is the absolute opposite of the Darken group, right? So let's go take a look and see what Lighten does. I'm just going to use the tetramat. I'm going to place it down right here. Now, the Lighten blend mode takes a look at the base colors and the blend color, all right? And it keeps whichever of the two is lightest. You notice with the Darken blend mode, it says, I'm picky. I'm going to pick the darker of the two layers. Lighten says the reverse. It says, hey, I'm going to pick the lightest of the two layers. So if I switch to Lighten, here's what you notice. 100% black, or 0, right here in this panel, shows no change whatsoever. And now the closer that I go in my gray tones, midtones closer to white, it's going to lighten it, okay? So basically what these Lighten blend modes do is they just lighten things, and they are extremely useful for a lot of things, okay? So that is the Lighten blend mode. And as you would expect, the Screen blend mode just does it harder. So if I go to Screen, it adds more light. So black does absolutely nothing, while white shows pure white. Because remember, it's being picky and it's choosing the lighter of the two layers. That's it. It's not complex, okay? So now let's go check out our Lighten blend mode. Let's switch over to Screen. Now, just like with the Darken is the reverse of Lighten, Screen is the opposite, all right, of the Lighten blend mode. What Screen does is it just adds more, right? Let me make sure that I have the right blend mode on here. Let me switch over, go to Screen, as you can see. So Lighten adds more light, Screen even more light, and the last one is Color Dodge. Color Dodge is a little bit more interesting. Dodging adds white. Okay, it adds white. So the color dodge blend mode lightens the bottom layer, that's the base layer, depending on the values of the top layer. So the brighter the top layer, the more its color affects the bottom layer. Okay, so as you can see, what's happening here is if you go to your black, no information is rendered. If you go to white, none of the information is rendered. So this is one of those blend modes that relies on midtones. Okay. Now, the question now is application. What exactly is the Lighten blend modes for? What do you do with it, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and explain what the Lighten blend mode does. Me, personally, I love using the Lighten blend modes to remove line work, okay? So if I switch this right here to the blend mode Lighten, okay, you're gonna notice in black, no effect. The closer I go into the midtones, notice how the line work, the darker line work, begins to disappear, right? So now I go into a lighter shade of gray, another lighter shade of gray, another lighter shade of gray. So what it's doing is removing the darks or just amplifying the lights, right? So if I go into pure white, zero effect whatsoever. Okay, you don't see it, it's not going to interact. So the Lighten blend modes is great for removing line art. Let's just put that into application onto the map. If I take this sword graveyard map that I made, and I'm going to go ahead and take that coral, which I accidentally deleted. Okay, real quick. And we're going to turn off the object shadow. Let's just say that you like this stamp a lot, right? You like that interesting kind of squiggly kind of texture, and you want to apply it to maybe in your dungeon somewhere. So if I apply the Lighten blend mode, notice how I've removed the line work, and yet here's this kind of interesting kind of coral-like flooring, right? So it's again useful for removing darker line work within a stamp. Let me give another example of what you can do with the Lighten blend modes, okay? Let's go ahead and just push this back to its normal self, and I'll push this over the side over to here, okay? So what does it look like with other stamps? So let's say I have a table, right? And my table is not long enough, but I don't want to stretch it to where I obscure the table, right? See, that doesn't look good, right? So what I can do is take two of these tables, copy, paste, put them side by side, and you notice that there is the line work at each end of the table in the center. And it kind of gets in the way, right? You don't really like that. So let's take another table and of course put it on top. And if I switch the blend mode to Lighten, what do you know? It removes those darkened line work and it allows the table to look like it's extended. So again, the Lighten blend modes is really useful for removing line work of stamps. At least that's the main reason that I use this blend mode for. Of course, there are more applications, but this one is the easiest that I can think of, okay? And if there are any EA people out there who have more experiences with blend modes, don't be shy. Share what other information you have about blend modes, okay? All right, so that pretty much explains the Lighten blend modes. Pretty simple stuff, right? I'm just going to go ahead and save the map real quick, and we'll move on to the next group, which is going to be the contrast blend modes, and I will explain how they operate. So let the map save, and let's go ahead and jump in here. All right, so over here, let's see into the blend modes. The next group is the contrast groups. Now, what does that mean when I say contrast? Contrast just means adding light to the lights and adding darks to the darks. That's it. It's as simple as that. Now, most stamps are going to have the normal blend mode, but there are some stamps that utilize the overlay blend mode, like light sources. So what the overlay blend mode is basically doing is it's a combination of the multiply blend mode and the screen blend mode, with the base layer always shining through. So overlay is basically going to be using the screen blend mode at half strength on colors lighter than 50% gray. So if that's confusing, don't worry. Let's apply a light source, and you'll notice in the blend modes, it's automatically set to overlay. Now remember, the base layer is always going to be shining through. So when I apply a light source set to overlays, I'm not losing any information on this map. All it's doing is just overlaying the hue and brightness from this brightness stamp, from this light stamp, so I can change the hue. See, all it's doing is just adding the hue to the base layer and with a little bit of brightness. Okay, so this overlay blend mode is the best blend mode to use for light sources. Okay, and it's also useful for creating highlights, which we will go into. Okay, so this is the blend mode you're going to want to use for light sources. Okay, if I go back, go to the blend mode normal, you'll see that, hey, it loses some of the value or some information in the base layer. So of course you're going to want to use the overlay. It's just going to overlay and you're not losing any of the values underneath on the base layer. That's why the light stamp is set to the overlay blend mode. Now the next blend mode is soft light. Okay, this blend mode is similar to using dodge or color burn. In other words, every color that is lighter than 50% gray will get even lighter, like if it were you to shine some kind of soft spotlight onto it. So look carefully. When I apply this and I put it down right here, look at the difference between the overlay blend mode and the soft light blend mode. It basically added a soft spotlight to it. It's not the blend mode that I use for lighting, but it's one that you can use and it has some use case values. Okay, it's not going to be as useful as your overlay blend mode. Okay, now the next one is going to be your hard light. Okay, hard light is a bit different. At 100% opacity, the hard light blend mode keeps the whites completely white and the blacks completely black. So when you're using soft or hard light, just notice that when I apply it to the parts everywhere, okay, it is going to retain that hue, right? It's not the best blend mode to use for your light sources unless you want it to be a little kind of taking up some information. This blend mode is really more effective when you drop the opacity. Okay, if I drop the opacity a little bit, it works a little better. But overall, the best blend mode within this group, the most applicable, is going to be that overlay blend mode. Okay, you'll see again that the base layer loses no information. That's why it works the best for light sources. Okay, all right, as simple as that. Let's go ahead and delete this light source, and I'm going to show a little bit about how you can use this when making highlights with the overlay blend mode. So let's go ahead and turn off this mount or this let's see, the sword graveyard real quick, and let's go into the tetra map, put it 100%, put it back at the normal blend mode. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and take a path. I'm going to go ahead and apply it to the map, of course. Oops, it's set to screen, my mistake. Let's go ahead and turn that off and set it to normal. Of course, whenever you're using paths, always make sure that you set it to normal first and then put down a path so that way you can see how it interacts with stuff. Okay, so first I'm going to choose a color that I want. Okay, so I'm just going to use this yellowish color. That works well for a highlight, right? That's that warm yellow color that you get from natural lighting, like the sun, right? So let's switch the blend mode to overlay. Okay, see what it does? Overlay still keeps all the information in the base layer, but adds that yellow to it. Now I'm also going to drop the opacity a little bit, okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and pretend that the sun, the light source, is coming from the left side and it's applying onto this temple. So I can go in like this, take that overlay blend mode with the path tool and just apply it like this. And what I'm doing is just creating highlights. That's it. I want to have a highlight here, maybe some highlights here. And that is basically the most important thing that I'm going to be using the overlay blend mode for, is to create those nice warm highlights from where your light source is coming from. Really as simple as that. And your overlay is probably going to be the most used of all the blend modes. Now there are other blend modes that are useful as well, but your overlay is probably going to be the most useful. So that pretty much explains the contrast groups. Okay, that is the most important. I generally like to use overlay a lot, so it's a really good blend mode to use. So definitely use those for your highlights. It's the most used case that I use them for. There are other ones, of course. Let's go ahead and go to the next blend group. Okay, we go to the next blend group, you're going to see the inversion group. Now, this group is highly, artistically speaking, not very useful. You're probably not going to be using this one very much. But what the inversion group basically does is it looks for variations between the base and the blend layers to create the blend. So what that means is red areas will appear cyan, greens will appear magenta, and blues will appear yellow, and vice versa. So think of it as a photograph. Photographs also use light. So what's happening is it's going to invert the colors like a photo negative. Okay, let me go ahead and just showcase how that works. If I take this map right here, this tetra map, and I switch it to the blend mode difference, you're going to notice that 100% black, or just black being that 0, has absolutely 0 effect. Okay, but the closer that I get to white, the more and more the colors begin to invert. Okay, so pure white is going to create a negative, right? That's it. So that's all this blend mode does. It's inverting the RGB values. That's it. RGB is red, green, and blue. RGB. Okay? Now, the other blend mode, exclusion, works in a similar way to difference, but instead, blending with white inverts the base color values, while blending with black produces no change. Okay? However, blending with 50% gray produces 50% gray. Let's apply that and see what that looks like. If I go to exclusion, you'll notice that the grays in the midtones show through, and of course no change with black, and completely inverted with white. Now these blend modes are not going to be very useful to you probably, but there are some rare use cases that you might find interesting. Let's go ahead and just show that. Okay, let's go ahead and take the tetra map, take it down, let's switch over to the sword graveyard map, and let's see what we can do with the difference and exclusion blend modes. Let's add a light source, shall we? Right now it's set to overlay, okay? I'm gonna go ahead and apply that, put it there, and now I'm gonna switch that blend mode to difference. And it's inverting the colors. So you can take the hue slider from that stamp, and as you notice, it's inverting the colors because the hue is changing of the blend layer, which is the light stamp. It kind of has some eerie, otherworldly kind of effect, which is kind of interesting if maybe you want to create a portal that leads to a different world, and it kind of inverts those. It shows the upside down, the inverted world, right? So it kind of works a little bit as kind of an otherworldly feel, right? Maybe I want to put it right here, and it changes and inverts the colors around it. So it's not very useful on an artistic level, but it can work in some ways if you're just trying to create an otherworldly gate or portal that leads to some other world that's just the opposite of ours. That's really the only use case that I could come up with. I'm sure there's a lot more. You should definitely experiment and try new things. So that's difference. Now I'll go ahead and add exclusion. Just a minor difference. Changing the hue, of course, still inverts the colors. Okay? Really, this, again, blend mode is not going to be very useful, but you can always find ways to have fun. All right, so let's go ahead and delete this light source. So that pretty much lines up or explains the difference or exclusion blend modes in the inversion group. Now, the last group is the component group. Now, this group is extremely useful. I actually use a lot of these, not all of them, but a lot of them. Okay, so the first one in that group is hue. Let's explain what exactly this component group does. The component blending modes uses different combinations of the primary color components, hue, saturation, brightness to create the blend, okay? So the first one is the hue blend mode. This blend mode preserves the brightness and saturation of the base layer while adopting the hue of the blend layer. So this can be used to change the hues of the base layer while maintaining the tones and saturation. It will use the hue of the blend layer, but maintain the tones and saturation of the base layer. Let me just give a quick example with a flat color, just so you get the general idea, okay? I have this red stamp right here. This is the blend layer, while this is the base layer. And if I apply the hue blend mode, What does it do? It's keeping the values of the base layer, but applies the red hue to the map. So this is kind of useful if you want certain areas to be certain colors. So let's say you want to take the path tool and you want to paint a stamp red. That was what you would use. You would use the Hue Blend Mode with a red path to color it. So this is pretty useful if you want to change the hue of something on your map, whether it's a stamp, a section of your whole map, whatever. So this is a really highly useful blend mode, and I'll be doing some examples with that in just a minute. Let's just move over to the next blend mode. All right, the next blend mode is going to be the saturation blend mode, okay? So what saturation does, all it does is it's going to saturate the color of the blend mode more onto the base. So if I switch over to saturate, you'll notice that it's saturating all of the hues beneath on the base layer. So the orange pops out more orange, the green pops out more. Okay, so saturation means saturating or adding more hue. Okay, so it's going to be even more saturated of that color. Can be useful. I don't generally use saturation in a lot of instances, but it is useful if you want to change some colors on some parts of your map. Okay, it's really as simple as that. So this blend mode just basically preserves the brightness and hue of the base layer while adopting the saturation of the blend layer. So basically a black and white blend layer also turns the image into grayscale because none of the pixels in the luminosity layer have any saturation. So let me show you what I mean by that when I say that. Okay, so if there's no hue or color on the base layer, what does that mean? It means that it's not going to show anything at all. So let me take the tetra map and switch it to the saturation blend mode. Oopsie, did I have the right tetra map? Let me make sure that I have it. Oh, not saturation, sorry. Wait, which one? Where is it? Am I working properly? Let me make sure. Oh, I have the wrong layer selected. That's the problem. My mistake. So many different layers in here. Let me go back. Sword Graveyard. Now, if I switch this over to the saturation blend mode, what happens? Because there is no hue whatsoever in this grayscale, it's not going to work at all. So the base layer needs to have hue or color for the saturation blend mode to operate. Because there is no hue and no color in this base layer, it's not going to do anything, okay? So always remember that if you want to use a saturation blend mode, you need some color in the base layer, okay? Not complex, right? Super easy, okay? Let's go ahead and bring that back to the normal blend mode so you can kind of see what it looks like. Let's go check out the next blend mode, which is going to be color. Color is extremely useful. I use it a lot. This blend mode preserves the brightness of the base layer while adopting the hue and saturation of the blend layer. Color is ideal blend mode for coloring monochromatic images. So let's go ahead and just apply this real quick and see what it looks like when I apply the color blend mode. Okay, so I go over and apply color. All it's doing is applying color to the base layer. White, of course, has no information, and black has no information because there is no color in black, right? So this blend mode isn't very useful unless you're going to be changing maybe a couple things with the paths. So I'll explain how that operates in just a moment. Let's switch over to the next blend mode, luminosity, okay? Now luminosity is going to take whatever hue is in the base layer. Now because there's no hue in that grayscale image below, it's not going to take any color whatsoever, right? So of course luminosity has zero effect on grayscale, all right? So you need some hue for the luminosity blend mode to operate. Let me give you an example. Let me go ahead and turn off the sword graveyard, put that at the normal blend mode and just turn it off to 0. Opacity. Let's say, for instance, that I want to, a great example of how to use these blend modes, a great example, a great use case for this is applying rivers. Now, a lot of times with the mask tool, you might notice that it's too big and the river needs to be a lot smaller. Well, one thing that you can do is you can create rivers with your path tool, all right? So as always, go ahead and put down a path. I'm going to go ahead and set it to the normal blend mode. I'm going to set it to blue, and what I'm going to do is look for a color that is similar to the color of this ocean, right? That's why I put this path on top, and I'm going to switch it to blue. Okay, now I'm going to go in and maybe pick a color that best kind of matches that. Oh, that looks about right. Maybe move it a little bit more blue. I think that looks about right. Let's apply it up here. Okay, I think that looks good. Let me put it back to 100% just to make sure. Let's move the color a little bit more. There we go. That looks good to me. I think this should work. Okay. Now, of course, when you're using this, what you want to do is you want to basically retain the values beneath, right? So if I switch this blend mode to hue, you'll notice that it adds the blue on top of that landmass to green. Well, because the blue of the ocean is similar to the color of the path, it's going to negate it. So paths are useful for creating rivers. Let me just turn off that blur, and let's bring the size down just a little bit of the width. Okay, so the Hue Blend Mode is perfect for creating rivers that are going to be smaller than the mask tool option. So if I just start right here and just kind of wind in like this, you'll notice that I can create a river without accidentally losing any of the information beneath that is the base layer. So really, Hue is the best one to use for that. Now, also, you can also put paths over each other. If I put a path overlapping this path, you notice that it doesn't add to it, right? If I switch over to color, let's say that I want to take these two paths. Let's switch them over to the color. All right, let's switch these two paths. Let's switch them over to color. And this allows you to basically create, you can add these two paths on top of each other without the part where they intersect adding more blue to it, right? So these blend modes work perfectly for pretty much using coloring in areas, a color that you want. You can use paths, you can use light sources, whatever it is you think best. It's going to save the information beneath, that is the base layer. So really useful blend modes in my opinion. I think there's a couple examples real quick that I wanted to show, but that's with those. The other one that you can do is luminosity, which is extremely useful. Let me just show real quick how I would use the luminosity blend mode. It's the other useful stamp. I have this map right here, and let's say that I want to create maybe like a ruin or something that's in the water, right? Now, set at the normal blend mode, it doesn't really do much, right? You're noticing that it's just not interacting. But if I switch the blend mode to luminosity, what I'm doing is picking up the color underneath, the hue underneath. See, if I switch it over to here, it turns green. See how some of it's in blue and some of it's green? It's picking up the hue beneath it. So this is very useful for a number of things. Let's say that you have a staircase that leads up to maybe some ruins, and you want the staircase to be the same color as the ground texture. You switch to the luminosity blend mode, okay? So luminosity is extremely useful for picking up the hue beneath it. That's going to be the base layer, okay? Now, of course, when you're doing this, you'll notice that it retains that dark line work. When something's underwater, it's probably going to be skewed a little bit. So we can go in and change the contrast a little bit to make it look like it's a little bit more underwater, okay? And you can also change the opacity. All right, so now it looks like that is underwater. Really as simple as that, right? Remember I mentioned those staircases? Let me put in a stair real quick and just see how that works. This is a watercolor city map. Let me go in and punch in stairs real quick, and I'll show you how that works. Just one moment while the art loads. Let's type in stair. So let's say you have these natural stairs right here, right? But they don't really look all that natural up against maybe right here, right? It doesn't really work out too well. So what you can do is change that blend mode, of course, to luminosity. And you kind of have this green, grassy covered staircase leading up to it, okay? So your luminosity blend mode is great for changing stamps to suit with the base layer, okay? That's really as simple as luminosity really is. It's not complex, super easy. So each blend mode has its own use cases, okay? Some are going to be more useful than others. Let's real quick review what we just looked at. Okay, so that first blend mode, of course, is your normal, which has 0 effect, right? It's not going to have any effect. If I put it down on here, set to normal, 0 effect. The darken blend modes basically just darken things. Now remember, you don't want to use white or black when you're working with the darken blend modes, okay? And it's extremely useful for doing your shadowing. That's what I use the darken group for the most. The next group is that lighten group. And what I did with the lighten group was basically try to remove the line work from certain stamps because you might not want the line work with a stamp. So lighten lightens the blend layer and will remove the line work on it. So really it's a very useful blend mode, the lighten blend mode specifically. Very, very useful. The third group is the overlay group. And again, you notice that overlay works great for creating your highlights on your map. It also is set to the default blend mode overlay for your lights because, again, the overlay blend mode retains the information of the base layer but applies the hue and brightness on top. So it's great for light sources, right? That next group is inversion, and remember, it didn't really do much. It's not a very, artistically speaking, not a very applicable blend mode, but of course it has 1 or 2 useful use cases. It's that ethereal look. It's great to maybe use a path tool and to see how that operates and to see how it inverts, just like a photo negative, right? Remember, it's taking those RGB values and inverting them, okay? Not the most artistically useful blend mode, but I'm sure as creative as you all are, you will discover and explore ways of using these blend modes, okay? That last group is the component blend group. And of course, I showed you that hue is extremely useful for coloring things. Color also works, saturation, and of course, luminosity, which is extremely useful for picking up the color or hue information of the base layer. And then it projects that onto the blend layer, okay? Very, very useful. So that concludes the blend mode tutorial. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. We can use these last 13 minutes to ask some general questions that you might have. And it's okay, King Clown, if you're late, okay? Yes, absolutely, Cheryl. Pro tip, that path tool is perfect. The hue with path tool is perfect for changing the color of assets like flowers or pillows on a bed, okay? For instance, some stamps might have a white and you want to change that stamp to a different color, right? Because white has isn't going to change any colors when you're using the hue slider bar with HSBC. So that hue blend mode is perfect for coloring stamps that might not be HSBC friendly, okay? All right, please ask any questions that you have and we can answer those questions. I really enjoyed this stream. We went over all the blend modes and most of its use cases. Of course, there is a lot more. Don't be shy. Feel free to share any knowledge that you have with the chat because, hey, there's a lot more use cases probably, okay? But not everyone has the time to go through and experiment with all the various blend modes. Okay, please ask any questions. Please, 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 and we will answer them. All right, sweet. That was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed working on this stream. It doesn't look like there's any questions that I can. I'm struggling a lot with making forests in a world map. Oh, well, I'll let Cheryl answer that question for you because it's not necessarily directly related to blend modes. So I'll let our mod answer that question. Feel free to Nashishi, first time chatter, to ask Cheryl or SL Mumby any questions that you have about forests, and they will gladly help you with it. Also, don't forget that if you have questions that aren't related to this blend mode tutorial stream, feel free to also join our Discord server. Our Discord server has a map feedback and also has tons of mentors that are willing to help you out. So if you have any questions, join that Discord and ask a mentor. Just ping a mentor and we will help. Oh, perfect. If you have some questions about forests that aren't related to blend modes, go ahead and ask that question there. Not that your question isn't important, but I'm just going to try to stay true to what necessarily this tutorial is about, which is blend modes. Okay. All right. No questions. Oh, there's tons of tutorials on forests. Cheryl can go ahead and link to you any maps that might be helpful. I know I have a whole bunch of guides on blend modes, or not on blend modes, but on forests. So just go to my profile and check that out. I have at least 3 or 4 guides on forests, so check them out, okay? Is there any questions about blend modes? Did I explain it properly? I hope I didn't lose you. Blend modes can be confusing, I understand, but hopefully this stream helped a lot, okay? If there's no questions concerning blend modes, then we'll probably just wrap it up. I'm going to wait a few moments for people to bring in any questions they might have with blend modes. And if there are none, then we'll call it good. Just so you know, the next stream is going to be next week, next Wednesday, 10 a.m. PST. And it's how to annotate your maps. Okay? Sometimes when you're making a map, it's very difficult to understand how you should label your map. How should I make an interesting map title? What font should I use? What colors should I use with my fonts? All these questions are going to be answered in that stream on how to annotate your maps, because sometimes it's a little confusing, right? Some people get confused and then they'll use several different fonts, and sometimes that looks a little clashes a little bit. So that stream, if you have a hard time with creating a map title, labeling your groups, that includes even coming up with names, okay? We'll include that in that stream. So make sure to go check that out. Now I want to mention also real quick that we also have a new Twitch banner that pops up when a Twitch stream is happening. So extremely useful. Hopefully you won't miss any streams because of that Twitch banner. Okay? All right. Well, that is the end of the stream. Thank you so much, everybody. I had a great time explaining how everything works and kind of giving you use cases. Remember to be creative. Step outside of your comfort zone, experiment, play around if you have time. Hey, first time chatter, thanks. That's how I saw this one. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you so much. Everyone, you have been wonderful. Thank you for following along, and thank you for sharing any information that you had in the chat. I will be seeing you all next week on the 27th at 10 a.m. PST. And of course, hey, don't forget, we're going to Gen Con, okay? I'm going to be there doing demos, some behind the scenes stuff. It's going to be fun. Go check that out. All right, everybody, thank you. You have been wonderful. You enjoy your hump day, almost there to the weekend. You enjoy the rest of your week. Please stay safe and healthy. Stay cool. It's going to be a hot one today. Put your faces in front of those fans, all right, and cool yourself down. So please stay safe and healthy. Merry map making, and I will see you all again next week. Bye, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Stay cool, okay?